My landlord had never stepped inside my apartment, not once. For almost 3 years, our entire relationship consisted of short text messages. Rent was paid online. If something broke, he sent a contractor. When my refrigerator stopped working, he replaced it without even coming to inspect it himself. When the water heater failed, I came home from work and found a brand new one already installed. He always respected one rule. He never entered a tenant's home. That was why the knock on my door at 8:14 on a rainy Thursday morning immediately felt wrong. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, Arthur Miller stood in the hallway. 70 years old, gray jacket, flat cap, always neatly dressed. But that morning, he looked terrified. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. His eyes were bloodshot, as though he hadn't slept all night. Before I could say hello, he spoke. "You need to move out." I laughed. "What?" "Today." For a second, I honestly thought he was joking. "I've paid my rent." "I know. I've never missed a payment." "I know. So what's going on?" Arthur looked down the hallway before answering. "I need you gone before sunset." His voice wasn't angry. It wasn't demanding. It sounded desperate. I frowned. "You're evicting me?" "No." "Then what?" He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and pulled out an envelope. Inside was a cashier's check. I stared at the number. $15,000. "I don't understand." "That's your security deposit. And the rest? Take it." "For what?" "So you'll leave." I looked back up at him. "I still don't understand." "You don't have to. Just pack your things. I'll even help you move." For 3 years, Arthur had barely spoken more than a dozen sentences to me. Now he was offering me $15,000 just to leave my own apartment. None of it made any sense. My lease doesn't end until October. "I know. I don't have another place." "I'll pay for a hotel." I studied his face. This wasn't a negotiation. This wasn't someone trying to get rid of a difficult tenant. He looked afraid. "Arthur, what aren't you telling me?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again. "I can't." "Why not?" "I promised." "Promised who?" He didn't answer. Instead, he glanced toward the stairwell, almost as if he expected someone to be listening. "I shouldn't have come here." "Then why did you?" He looked directly into my eyes. "Because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try." Those words sent a chill through me. "Try to do what?" "Get you out." I folded my arms. "If there's a gas leak, there isn't. If the building is unsafe, it isn't. If there's asbestos or mold," he shook his head, "it's none of those." "Then what is it?" Again, he refused to answer. Instead, he took a small set of keys from his pocket. "These are for cabin 12. I looked at them. "My brother owns a fishing cabin about 40 minutes from here. You can stay there as long as you need. For free." I already called him. "He knows you're coming." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You've arranged somewhere for me to live?" "Yes." "Why?" He looked exhausted. "Because after today, I don't think this building will be safe." That was the first concrete thing he'd said. "What do you mean?" "I can't explain." "You have to." "I can't." "Arthur, I'm not leaving my apartment because you showed up with a check and a cabin key." His shoulders dropped. For a moment, I thought he was going to tell me everything. Instead, he whispered, "I was afraid you'd say that." He slowly put the envelope on the small table beside my front door. "If you change your mind, call me." He turned toward the hallway, then stopped. Without looking back, he quietly said, "Whatever happens tonight, don't answer the knocking." I stared at him. "What knocking?" He didn't reply. He simply walked away. I stood in the doorway until he disappeared down the stairs. Not the elevator. The stairs. He'd climbed 4 flights just to avoid waiting for the elevator. That struck me as strangely deliberate. I closed the door. For nearly 10 minutes, I simply stood in my living room, staring at the envelope. $15,000, a cabin key. No explanation, no eviction notice, nothing. I called Arthur, straight to voicemail. I texted him, No response. I even called the property management company listed on my lease. The receptionist sounded confused. Arthur Miller manages that building himself. So there's no office? No. Did something happen? I don't know. She paused. But you're the third tenant who's called this morning. My stomach tightened. The third? Yes. They all asked strange questions. What kind of questions? Whether they should move. And what did you tell them? I told them to speak with Mr. Miller. So they called him too? I assume so. I thanked her and hung up. The third tenant. That meant Arthur hadn't come only to see me. He'd visited other apartments first. I walked to the window overlooking the parking lot. 2 moving trucks were parked outside. That wasn't unusual. People moved all the time. Except I recognized both families, apartment 2 billion and 3D. Neither of them had mentioned moving, yet both were loading furniture as quickly as they could. No children running around. No chatting with neighbors. Just silent packing, almost frantic. Then I saw Arthur. He stood beside one of the trucks, speaking with a middle-aged couple. The woman hugged him. He hugged her back. Then she climbed into the passenger seat, and the truck drove away. Arthur remained standing in the parking lot, alone, watching until the vehicle disappeared around the corner. Then he slowly looked up, directly toward my apartment. Even from 4 floors above, I could see the disappointment on his face. He knew. I hadn't listened, and for some reason, that seemed to frighten him even more. I watched Arthur stand in the parking lot for almost a minute. He didn't move. He simply stared at my building. Then he looked at his watch, sighed, climbed into his old pickup truck, and drove away. I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe the building had been sold. Maybe major renovations were about to begin. Maybe Arthur had simply handled it terribly. $15,000 was a strange way to ask someone to leave, but people did strange things under pressure. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that he'd genuinely been trying to protect me. Around noon, I decided to knock on a few neighbors' doors. Apartment 2B was already empty. Boxes were gone. Furniture was gone. The apartment echoed when someone closed the front door inside. Apartment 3D was the same. Only 1 unit on my floor still seemed occupied. A young woman named Rachel answered after a few seconds. She looked exhausted. Dark circles under her eyes. Half-packed boxes stacked behind her. "You're leaving too?" She nodded. "This afternoon. Arthur came to see you?" Her face changed immediately. "He came to you too?" I nodded. "What did he tell you?" She hesitated. "The same thing, I guess. Leave. Immediately." "And you believed him?" She looked down the hallway before lowering her voice. "I've lived here almost 5 years. I've never seen him scared before." "Neither have I. He offered me money." "Me too." I frowned. "Did he explain why?" "No." "Then why are you leaving?" Rachel answered so quietly I almost didn't hear her. "Because Arthur isn't the kind of man who scares easily." That sentence stayed with me. She closed her door a few minutes later and continued packing. By 3 o'clock, another moving truck had arrived. By 4, Rachel was gone. Now my entire floor was empty, except for my apartment. That evening, I drove to the grocery store. When I returned just after 7, something immediately felt different. The parking lot was almost empty. Normally 40 or 50 cars filled the spaces. Tonight, there were 8. I slowly counted. Half the building had apparently moved out in a single day. That wasn't possible. People didn't relocate with only a few hours' notice. Not entire families. Not without some kind of emergency. As I carried my groceries inside, I noticed 2 men standing near the mailboxes. Both wore dark blue jackets with no company logos. One held a clipboard. The other carried rolled-up building plans. They stopped talking as I walked past. Evening. Neither answered. Instead, both watched me until I stepped into the elevator. I pressed the button for the 4th floor. The doors began closing. Just before they shut completely, I saw one of the men point toward me. The other quietly nodded. My apartment suddenly felt much larger than usual. Not because anything had changed, because the silence had. No television from next door, no footsteps upstairs, no music drifting through the walls. The building sounded empty. Around 9 o'clock, I took out the trash. The hallway lights flickered once, then returned to normal. As I reached the stairwell door, I noticed fresh yellow paint on the wall. A new arrow. Basement, I frowned. That hadn't been there yesterday. Our building had never allowed tenants in the basement. Only maintenance workers had access. I walked downstairs anyway. The basement door was locked. Nothing unusual there. But something caught my attention. Voices. Not behind the door. Farther below. Deep. Muffled. Like people working somewhere underneath the basement itself. I pressed my ear against the cold metal. At first I heard nothing. Then, a dull metallic clang. Another. Then what sounded like heavy machinery starting somewhere underground. The vibration traveled through the door into my shoulder. It lasted only a few seconds before stopping completely. I stepped back. Our building didn't have underground parking. It barely even had a basement. So what exactly was making that noise? Back upstairs, I searched the building online. Construction permits. Property records. Recent inspections. Nothing. Everything looked normal. Built in 1989. 48 apartments. 1 basement level. No major renovations. No structural repairs. No permits issued in the last 5 years. Yet half the tenants had moved out in a single day. Around 10:30, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I answered. Silence. Hello? Nothing. Then I heard breathing. Very faint. Finally a voice spoke. Did Arthur come? It wasn't Arthur. It was a man's voice. Older. Calm. Who's this? He asked you to leave. Who are you? You should have listened. The line went dead. I immediately called back. Number unavailable. I barely slept. Not because I was frightened. Because I couldn't stop thinking. Arthur. The money. The moving trucks. The empty apartments. The strange workers downstairs. None of it fit together. At exactly 2:17 in the morning, I woke to a vibration. Not my phone. Not thunder. The floor itself. Very slight. Barely noticeable. Then came the sound. A low mechanical hum. Somewhere beneath the building. It lasted perhaps 20 seconds. Then disappeared. I got out of bed and walked into the hallway. The entire floor was silent. Every apartment around mine stood dark and empty. Then I noticed something else. The elevator. Its floor indicator was moving. 4, 3, 2, 1, B. It stopped. A few seconds passed. Then instead of returning, the display changed to something I'd never seen before. B2. I stared at it. Our building didn't have a second basement. I'd lived there for almost 3 years. The elevator directory listed only 1 underground level. Yet the indicator remained on B2 for nearly a full minute. Then it began moving upward again. When the doors finally opened on my floor, the elevator was empty. But muddy boot prints covered the floor inside. Fresh. Leading out, not in. I looked around the empty hallway. There was no one there. Then, somewhere far below me, I heard another heavy metallic clang. This time, it sounded much closer. I stood outside the elevator for nearly a minute. The muddy footprints were still there. Fresh. Whoever had stepped out hadn't bothered hiding them. The prints led down the hallway, past my apartment, toward the emergency stairwell. Then, they simply disappeared. Not faded, disappeared. The carpet beyond the stairwell door was perfectly clean. I checked the soles of my shoes. Dry. No mud anywhere else. It didn't make any sense. I took a few photos with my phone before going back inside. By morning, the footprints were gone. Not cleaned. Gone. The hallway carpet looked as though nothing had ever been there. At work, I couldn't concentrate. Around lunchtime, I called the county records office. I need information about an apartment building. The clerk asked for the address. A few minutes later, she returned. What exactly are you looking for? Building plans. Those are public records. Can I see them? Of course. I drove there immediately after work. The original blueprints were almost 40 years old. 4 residential floors, 1 basement, exactly as I remembered. But then, something caught my attention. A revision dated only 11 months earlier. Excuse me. The clerk looked up. This page wasn't in the original plans. She adjusted her glasses. No. That's a later amendment. What changed? She studied the drawing. It looks like the basement. I leaned closer. The original basement layout had been crossed out. A completely different design sat on top of it. Large sections were marked. Authorized personnel only. Most of the details had been blacked out. Only one room label remained visible. Mechanical access. Who requested this revision? She searched the file. The owner. Arthur Miller? No. She frowned. The property changed ownership last year. My stomach tightened. What? The building was sold. I've rented there for almost 3 years. I know. The ownership changed after you moved in. To who? She clicked through several screens. Willow Urban Development LLC. I've never heard of them. They're registered out of Delaware. Of course they were. So Arthur doesn't own the building anymore. He owns part of it. What does that mean? The company purchased 95%. He retained a small ownership interest. That explained one thing. Arthur hadn't lied. He was still technically my landlord. But he no longer controlled the building. Before leaving, I asked for a copy of the revised plans. The clerk hesitated. I'm afraid I can't print this page. Why not? It was restricted 2 months ago. Restricted by who? She looked genuinely confused. It doesn't say. On the drive home, I decided to stop by Arthur's house. It was only 15 minutes away, a small brick home on the edge of town. His old pickup sat in the driveway, but nobody answered the door. I knocked again, still nothing. As I turned to leave, an elderly woman watering flowers next door called out. Looking for Arthur? Yes. He left this morning. Do you know where? She shook her head. He looked upset, packed a suitcase. Said he might be gone for a while. Did he say why? No. She paused. But he did ask me something strange. What? If anyone came asking about him, I was supposed to tell them he never lived here. I stared at her. What? She laughed nervously. I thought it was an odd joke. I didn't. Back at the apartment building, 2 black SUVs were parked outside. Neither had government plates. Both engines were running. The 2 men I'd seen the day before still stood near the entrance. This time they wore hard hats. One carried surveying equipment. The other studied a digital tablet showing what looked like underground utility maps. As I walked past, they stopped talking again. Inside, another surprise waited. The building manager's office was empty. Desk cleared. Computer gone. Even the nameplate had been removed. A handwritten note was taped to the door. Property management relocated. No address. No phone number. Nothing. That night I decided I wasn't sleeping. If something happened beneath the building every night, I wanted to see it. At 1:40 a.m., I turned off every light in my apartment, opened my front door slightly, and waited. At exactly 2:17, the vibration returned. This time, stronger. A picture frame rattled against the wall. The hallway lights dimmed for a second, then stabilized. The elevator indicator lit up. 4, 3, 2, 1, B. Then again, B2. The doors opened on my floor. 3 men stepped out. All wore reflective safety jackets. Each carried heavy equipment cases. None of them looked toward my apartment. They walked silently to the stairwell. One unlocked the door with a key card. All 3 disappeared inside. The door closed. A few seconds later, I heard footsteps, not going down, going farther below, as though another staircase existed beneath the basement. I waited until the building fell silent again, then quietly crossed the hallway. The stairwell door was still unlocked. I slipped inside. Concrete steps spiraled downward, past the 4th floor, past the 3rd, past the 2nd, past the lobby, past the basement. I reached the landing marked B1. Below it, there should have been nothing. Instead, another flight of stairs continued into the darkness. No signs. No floor numbers. Just freshly poured concrete. And bright white LED lights that looked brand new. Someone hadn't just renovated the basement. They had built an entire level that officially didn't exist. And from somewhere below, I could hear dozens of people working. I should have turned around. Every instinct I had told me to go back upstairs. Instead, I kept walking. The new staircase descended another 20 feet before ending at a thick steel door. Unlike every other door in the building, this one had no apartment number, only a keypad. The door hadn't closed completely. Someone had left it open by less than an inch. Voices drifted through the gap. Pressure readings are stable. Finish before sunrise. Last tenants are almost gone. I held my breath. Carefully, I pushed the door open. Behind it was a corridor unlike anything I had expected. Bright LED lights lined the ceiling. Fresh concrete walls stretched in both directions. The floor looked as though it had been poured only weeks earlier. There were no exposed pipes, no storage rooms, no old foundation walls. It looked like an entirely new building hidden beneath the old one. I couldn't believe this was underneath the apartment where I'd lived for nearly 3 years. The corridor continued for what looked like hundreds of feet. Every 30 yards another heavy steel door appeared. Most were marked only with numbers. A few displayed warning signs. Authorized personnel only. Farther ahead I heard machinery. Not construction equipment. Hydraulic pumps. Air compressors. Large industrial ventilation systems. Someone had spent millions building this place. I moved quietly until I reached a corner. Beyond it opened a massive underground chamber. Nearly 20 workers moved around inside. Engineers, surveyors, electricians. Everyone wore reflective jackets with no company logos. Large digital screens covered one wall. They displayed maps, not of the city, of my apartment building. The entire foundation had been scanned in 3 dimensions. Colored lines extended beneath every support column. One engineer pointed toward the screen. North section completed. Another nodded. We begin transferring load tonight. Transferring load? I had no idea what that meant. I stepped back before anyone noticed me. Unfortunately, someone already had. You shouldn't be here. The voice came from behind me. I turned around. A security guard stood less than 10 feet away. He wasn't angry, mostly surprised. He looked me up and down. Which apartment? I didn't answer. He sighed. You're one of the tenants. I nodded slowly. He looked genuinely frustrated. They were supposed to have everyone out by now. Before I could ask what he meant, another voice echoed down the corridor. Leave him alone. I knew that voice immediately. Arthur. He hurried toward us faster than I'd ever seen him move. The security guard frowned. You know him? Arthur nodded. He's my tenant. Not anymore. Arthur ignored the comment. He grabbed my arm. What are you doing down here? I followed the workers. I told you to leave. You never told me why. I couldn't. Then tell me now. He looked around the corridor. Several workers had stopped to watch us. This isn't the place. It has to be. No. His voice cracked. It really doesn't. Without another word, he pulled me toward the staircase. The guard didn't stop us. Neither did anyone else. They simply watched us leave. Once we reached the old basement level, Arthur finally let go of my arm. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I asked the only question that mattered. What are they building? Arthur rubbed both hands across his face. They aren't building. They're preparing. For what? He looked toward the ceiling, toward the apartments above us, then quietly said, They're getting ready to move the building. I stared at him. What? You heard me. Buildings don't move. They do. Not apartment buildings. He didn't argue. Instead, he pulled a folded photograph from his jacket. It showed my building, only it wasn't where it stood today. The photograph had been taken decades earlier. The apartment complex sat almost 100 yards farther east. I frowned. That's impossible. It was relocated once before. I looked closer. The date stamped across the bottom read, October 1998. This has to be fake. Arthur slowly shook his head. No. The whole building was moved. But why? He looked toward the steel door leading back underground. Because what's beneath it was always more valuable than what stood above it. Before I could ask another question, a loud metallic boom echoed through the floor. The concrete beneath our feet trembled. Dust drifted from the ceiling. Somewhere below us, alarms suddenly began ringing. Arthur's face turned white. No, he whispered. They started early. The alarm lasted only a few seconds. Then the entire building shook again. This time harder. The fluorescent lights in the basement flickered. Somewhere below us, people started shouting. Arthur grabbed my arm. We have to get outside. What just happened? No time. He practically dragged me up the stairs. By the time we reached the lobby, several workers were already running toward the exits. None of them looked panicked. They looked trained, like they'd rehearsed this exact situation. Outside, the parking lot was filling with trucks and emergency vehicles. Not ambulances. Engineering trucks, survey vehicles, portable generators. A man wearing a white hard hat ran straight toward Arthur. You weren't supposed to be here. Arthur ignored him. What happened? The west hydraulic line lost pressure. Arthur closed his eyes. I knew this would happen. The engineer noticed me standing beside him. Who's he? My tenant. The engineer's expression immediately changed. I thought everyone was gone. So did I. Another deep vibration rolled beneath our feet. This one lasted almost 10 seconds. Several people instinctively stepped away from the building. I looked up. The apartment complex appeared perfectly normal. No cracks, no falling bricks, nothing. Yet I could feel the ground moving beneath my shoes. What are they doing down there? I asked again. Arthur finally sighed. They're trying to move the building. I shook my head. That's impossible. It isn't. He pointed toward the concrete foundation. They've spent almost a year constructing a temporary support system beneath the entire structure. They're lifting it a few inches. And sliding it. Sliding it where? Across the vacant lot behind the building. I stared at him. Why? Before Arthur could answer, the engineer did. Because everything underneath it belongs to someone else. The words hung in the air. What does that mean? The engineer hesitated. Arthur answered instead. When this building was constructed in the late 80s, nobody knew what was buried beneath this property. A few years ago they found it. What? Arthur looked toward the ground. The oldest fiber optic exchange hub in western North Carolina. I frowned. I don't understand, he continued. Over the last 20 years it became one of the most important communication routes on the East Coast. Thousands of internet connections. Emergency communication systems. Government networks. Financial data. They all pass beneath this building. So why not reroute them? The engineer laughed bitterly. Because rerouting them would cost billions. And shutting them down would affect half the region. I slowly looked back at the apartment building. So they're moving an entire apartment complex. Instead of moving the cables. Arthur nodded. Exactly. The whole idea sounded absurd. Until I remembered the underground chamber, the hydraulic systems, the reinforced concrete. Suddenly, it wasn't absurd anymore. It was exactly what they had been building. So why didn't anyone tell us? I asked. The engineer looked uncomfortable. They wanted every tenant relocated before work began. I would have left. Arthur quietly shook his head. No, I looked at him. What do you mean? They tried. They offered everyone new apartments. Most people refused. So they started paying people to leave. The moving expenses, the bonuses, the confidentiality agreements. Everything suddenly made sense. Every neighbor who had disappeared. Every moving truck. Every empty apartment. Arthur hadn't been forcing people out. He'd been trying to clear the building before the relocation began. But why were you so desperate this morning? I asked. Arthur looked exhausted. Because yesterday afternoon, the monitoring system detected unexpected movement. The building wasn't behaving the way the engineers expected. The engineer nodded. We postponed today's operation. Arthur looked directly at him. No. You said you postponed it. Silence. The engineer didn't answer. Arthur's voice became colder. You started anyway. The man looked away. We were under pressure. From who? He didn't respond. He didn't have to. Arthur already knew. At that moment, another loud metallic bang echoed beneath us. The entire parking lot vibrated. This time everyone heard it. Workers immediately began running toward the control trailers. One technician shouted, "We've lost alignment." Another yelled, "Section 3 is drifting." The engineer beside us grabbed his radio. "Shut everything down." Static answered him. Then a nervous voice came through. "We can't." "Why not?" "The locking system isn't responding." Arthur whispered something under his breath, then looked at me. "This is exactly why I begged you to leave." I frowned. "You knew this could happen?" "I hoped it wouldn't." Another violent jolt shook the ground. This one was different. Somewhere high above us, glass shattered. Every head turned toward the apartment building. A long crack slowly spread across the brick wall beside the fourth-floor windows. My windows. The windows of my apartment. Arthur grabbed my shoulder. "If you'd stayed inside, you would have been standing right there." Everyone backed away from the building. The crack running across the fourth floor continued growing for several seconds, then stopped. The engineer lowered his radio. No further movement. Arthur didn't look relieved. He looked angry. They rushed the operation. The engineer finally admitted it. We were behind schedule. "So you ignored the warning sensors?" He said nothing. That was answer enough. Within minutes, more vehicles arrived. Not police, not firefighters, structural engineers, survey crews, people carrying laser scanners and monitoring equipment. Nobody treated the situation like a disaster. They treated it like a failed engineering project. One woman walked up to Arthur. "We've stabilized the hydraulic system." "For now." Arthur nodded. "And the residents?" "Only one left." She looked at me. "I see." Over the next 2 hours, I learned the truth. 5 years earlier, engineers had discovered that one of the country's oldest communication corridors ran directly beneath our apartment building. When the building had been constructed decades earlier, nobody had known it was there. Replacing the underground network would have required shutting down emergency communications, financial systems, and major internet exchanges across several states. The alternative was considered impossible. Move the building instead. So they bought nearby land, constructed a massive reinforced concrete platform beneath the existing foundation, installed hundreds of hydraulic jacks, and spent nearly a year preparing to slide the entire apartment complex almost 60 feet onto a new foundation. It would have been one of the largest building relocations ever attempted, but only after every tenant had safely moved out. "So why all the secrecy?" I asked. The lead engineer answered. "If people heard we planned to move an occupied apartment building, most would have panicked, and others never would have agreed to leave." Arthur quietly added, "That's why I kept offering more money. I wasn't trying to buy anyone out. I was trying to protect them." I finally understood. The $15,000, the free cabin, the desperate look on his face. None of it had been about the building. It had been about the timing. The investigation lasted several months. It concluded that one contractor had ignored warning data showing uneven pressure beneath the western support columns. Instead of delaying the relocation, they pushed ahead. The system shifted before it was fully synchronized. Fortunately, the emergency locks activated before the building could move more than a fraction of an inch. The damage was limited to several cracked walls and broken windows. Nobody was injured, mostly because Arthur had spent the entire day convincing tenants to leave before work began, including me. The apartment building was eventually relocated. Not overnight, not secretly. The second attempt happened almost a year later. This time the operation was broadcast live to engineering universities across the country. Thousands of synchronized hydraulic jacks slowly lifted the structure. Over 18 hours, the entire 48-unit building moved 58 feet onto its new foundation, without a single broken water pipe, without a single collapsed wall. Today, If you drive past that address, you'd never know it had happened, unless you look carefully. The old foundation still sits behind the building, an empty concrete outline, like a footprint left behind. I never moved back. Arthur insisted on paying for a new apartment while construction finished. I refused the extra money. He refused to take it back. We eventually became friends. A year later, he finally admitted something that made me laugh. The engineers thought convincing people to move would be the hardest part. And, he smiled, it wasn't. What was? Convincing one stubborn tenant to trust an old landlord. Sometimes people ask why I believed him in the end. The truth is, I almost didn't. If Arthur had simply sent lawyers or eviction notices, I probably would have fought him. Instead, he climbed 4 flights of stairs himself, offered me his own money, his brother's cabin, and begged me to leave. Not because he wanted my apartment, because he wanted me alive. Looking back, the strangest part of the whole story isn't that an apartment building was moved. It's that the only person telling me the truth was the one person who wasn't allowed to explain it.